Hi, welcome back to Fresh Faces, No Ideas. My name is David. If you're new to the channel or you want to keep up to date with all the videos that I do, please like and subscribe. Please follow me on Twitter at Faces Ideas and enjoy the content, and we'll keep going from there. So this video, we're going to talk about Maxine Waters. Now, she went to Minneapolis over the weekend, I believe it was, and she said some things. We're going to look at her quotes, we're going to look at the response to it, and we're going to discuss it. So, based on what I've seen from the quotes, she was a little careless. However, there are things in this that are being overblown. And it is not the most egregious thing that a congressperson has said. Now, let's be clear. That does not make it okay, but we have to, there are levels to this. Saying get more confrontational is a problem in the sense that there's more violence. We shouldn't have the violence. However, the violence is not just coming from the protesters. You have to look at this in its entirety. You can't just say, all right, let's look at the quote first, and then I'll describe it. Okay. Her actual quote. This is, she's referring to the George Floyd, the Derek Chauvin trial. Now, I believe he's guilty. Anyone who watched the video and is objectively not a terrible person has to believe the same thing. So here's her response to that about whether it's a guilty verdict. We got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to be more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know we mean business. Now, let's be clear about some things. Most of this tweet is fine. This statement. We got to stay on the streets. We got to get more active. There's nothing wrong with that. Part of protesting is making people uncomfortable. And how do you do that? You constantly stay in the news, you constantly rally, you're constantly there. Be more active. Put more pressure on politicians by calling them. Put more pressure on your local politicians by calling them and going to meetings. Creating organizations that are designed to counter certain issues, to present data that backs up your facts, to just keep making noise about it until it's an issue that won't go away. So this is where it's getting issue, more confrontational. So they're inflating the confrontational to the riots. However, like I've said multiple times, 93% of all of the Black Lives Matter protests were peaceful. Most of these protests that have gotten violent have become violent due to outside sources. Either the police declaring it a riot and assaulting them, whether it's a person attacking them from the right wing or an outside agitator. Because look, there is always going to be people who take advantage of these situations. Always. They're going to attack it to try to malign it. But to malign this whole group is wrong. So Marjorie Taylor Greene has introduced the expel Maxine Waters. She's either she's agreement or whatever it is. The Democrat Kevin McCarthy said we should censor her. Now, let's be clear about something. The Republicans have no leg to stand on here. They just don't. This is not a one side versus the other side. The response from the Republicans leading into the protest and leading to the January 6th insurrection are much worse than anything Maxine Waters has said. These are not comparable. Am I saying what she said was right? No. Am I saying that, she has said the worst thing ever? No. Let's be clear. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who Kevin McCarthy did not want to censor, advocating for the murder of multiple congresspeople. Lord Boebert was cheering on the insurrectionists. Tom Cotton said we should drop the army in to kill the protesters. So, her saying getting more confrontational is not the right use of the word. However, these are protests. Protests are not designed to be, just happy-go-lucky, you can ignore them. They're designed to be a little disruptive. Burning and looting are not part of the protest. That's the difference. But let's look at what Marjorie Taylor Greene is, and there's some facts that I want to talk to you about from what she says from there. So this is gonna play her actual statement. She's on Real America Voice. I don't know what this is. I think this is a one of those OAN offshoots.
Good protesters do.
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
Joining me now to react.
So let's talk about something else. So since this, it's almost been a year since George Floyd died, and these protests started. Almost nothing has happened. There have been a few municipalities to changes, but there's been no real change on the federal level and leading down to it. The House did pass the George Floyd and Policing Act, and like the 40 other bills, it is sitting in the Senate to do nothing. And it will stay there until they do something about the filibuster. So that's part of the reason why people are protesting, because this issue hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. And Congresswoman, you have just filed a motion in Congress to expel Maxine Waters from Congress. So first of all, great. This is absolutely something that needs to happen. And
And remember, these are the same people who claim that there's a media bias on her response to this.
Tell people what this contains and why this was so important for you to file this today.
Well, I filed this on behalf of the American people. I want to ask Maxine Waters, what is more confrontational than what we have seen this past year, where BLM, Antifa thugs, domestic terrorists have rioted in American cities, burned American cities, looted American businesses, attacked innocent American people, and murdered innocent.
Okay, so she's arguing that BLM are terrorists. They're rioting, looters, and she's brought up Antifa. We're going to go over some data, but let's be clear. The protests and the riots and the looting are separate. Some of the issues of the people who get linked to some of these things, especially the one she's about to bring up, are not tied to BLM. The actual protests are separate from the rioting. By conjoining them, you're arguing that the protests are leading to the riots. It's not the way it works.
People like David Dorn. I want to know what is more confrontational than that, because if she's calling for telling people to stay in the streets and be more confrontational, then she's actually calling for war. She's actually wanting people to get
calling for war. Now let's be clear. Maxine Waters was talking about protesting. She did not say we're going to war. You use words like war. Janine Puro used words like war discussing a 13-year-old. And right-wingers use words like law. The Boogaloo Boys, the Oath Keepers, they use words like war. Nobody's advocating for a war except for the right wing.
Killed, like the Minnesota National Guardsmen that were shot at just hours after she was out there after curfew, breaking the law and telling people they need to stay in the streets, threatening a jury that is in the process of hearing closing arguments, and basically
she did not threaten the jury. We saw what she said. That was not what she said. Now, what the bringing guns to a protest, I'm going to go over that in some of the other data, but it is not good. If you are a left-wing person going to one of these protests, do not come armed. You are more likely to be attacked if you come armed. And like I've talked about on plenty of other videos, gun violence, being a hero for gun violence will not work. It just doesn't statistically exist.
Telling them that more violence is coming and they need to fight. She is out there acting like the commander of the BLM domestic terrorist army, and this is a U.S.
commander of the BLM domestic terrorist army. It's just okay. Let's remember who Marjorie Taylor Greene is very briefly. She is the person who has advocated for almost every single conspiracy theory, has advocated for the death of Nancy Pelosi, and a couple of her friends who she was, were part of her campaign were arrested on January 6th. So that's absurd statement. This idea of commander of the army. Look, this isn't an army. These are people who are protesting a great injustice. And I can't stress this enough. Two things. One, the violence and the rioting they have condemned. Also, two, Like and subscribe for more of these videos. But let's look at the facts. So her argument is Antifa and BLM are murdering people all over the place. Let's look at the last 25 years of BLM, of violence. Victims killed in anti-fascist attacks since 1994, 0. Victims killed in left-wing violence since 2010, 21. Victims killed in right-wing violence since 2010, 117. Victims killed in right-wing violence since 1994, 329. Let's be clear. This left-wing violence thing, they generally refer to eco-terrorist. The amount of people actually killed by Antifa is like 1. It's hold on, let's go to this. This is 25 people have died during the BLM protest. 14 have died. 11 Americans have been killed while participating in political demonstrations this year. Another 14 have died in other incidents linked to political unrest. Okay. This was the lead Keto was he was just making hats and that he was killed. So this is the only Antifa death is this far right Trump supporter who was killed by Michael Rhinelander, who said he was a anti-fascist, and then law enforcement found him and killed him. This is the one that, had this been a right winger, would be this man would be all over. He would be the face of the anti-BLM movement. But because he's a left-winger, he's not. So Garrett Foster was carrying an AK-47 when he was shot to death by an armed man who'd been driving through the crowd. This guy, his wife was paraplegic, and he was pushing her to be a part of the thing. And he was carrying the rifle just to like keep people away to make sure she was safe. And this dickhead was driving through the rally, and then he shot him. And this guy is also, advocating for killing other people. The guy who killed him. Let's see some of the other ones. In Kenosha, we know Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 people. A photographer was killed, but this was not related to a right winger. This was someone with homeless. This is the one that is bad. George Gomez was wearing body armor, carrying several guns. Before he was shot, several protesters told Gomez they disapprove of him being armed, and even a journalist questioned him about why he was holding his gun in his hand with his finger on the trigger. This is what I was referring to. If you are armed, you're more likely to create violence in these. Now, let's talk about David Dorn, because that's somebody that she brought up. David Dorn was a police officer who was retired, and he was responding to a looting that was taking place. This was after one of the protests, and somebody killed him. How you tie this to BLM is absurd, because yes, the protest happened and then there was looting. He was at one of the lootings. Nobody was saying the person wasn't they didn't go out and kill this guy because of BLM. It was an unfortunate consequence. So let's wrap this up. Look, the word confrontation is not a good use of the word confrontation. But let's be clear about what protests are. If you have a protest that does not make people uncomfortable, let's be clear, a non-violent protest, one that does not break the law, one does not looting, one does not rioting. That is the point of a protest, is to be loud and make people uncomfortable, because you're trying to draw attention to an issue. The idea that all of these protests are violent is just wrong. So look, if you're going to censor her, it should be the Democrats who decide to do that. Any Republican who says what she is saying is unacceptable is just a hypocrite. You don't get to have people who actually have fomented and argued for insurrection in your party and say someone encouraging protesters to be more confrontational are equivalent. That's not how this works. Let's also remember, Matt Gaetz is part of the Republican Party and has not been censured. He's still on the Judiciary Committee while he is being currently looked into by the Judiciary. So please like and subscribe. Thank you for this video, and I will see you in the next one.